Hello, everyone. One thing I've noticed all day is that everyone's been talking about how, the moderators have been talking about how much they love the brands they're interviewing. And so Diageo, Casamigos is my friend. And definitely need to have a little bit of a dry September now that summer's over. But a big fan of Casamigos, that's for sure. What's yours? Do you have
My favorite is Guinness, actually.
Oh, okay.
Big Guinness fan.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, quick introduction. Sarah Martinez, Integral Ad Science. Thrilled to see everyone today. Hopefully we'll see you for some drinks and dinner as well. And figured you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your career journey. Everyone's been doing that as an opener. I think it's really fantastic to hear, so if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Joshua Nafman. I'm Vice President of Data and Operations at Diageo. I have no idea how I made it into the position that I'm in. I started off as a copywriter, so data and operations, how does that go into it? But career journey was probably like most of you, was agency for a number of years, about 10 years, creative side, account planning, management, and then went brand side at places like small little companies like PepsiCo, and then was over at Kind Snacks for a couple of years. And so did the big corporation and then small startups, and then realized I like pushing on the walls of big corporations. So I'm at Diageo for about 5 years now, and ultimately the data and operations piece. Operations isn't what it sounds like. It's actually marketing operations. How do we actually get shit done? How does technology help us? And I'm the first person in Diageo on the marketing side with data in their title. And I kind of made up my own job. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, you were also saying when we were chatting last week something about, you're the center of the process and the tools and making sure that you're bringing it all together from a center of excellence across all of the brands. Is that correct?
Yes. So I like to think about data as the connective thread. If we know more about our consumers, our customers, and everything else, then what is who is doing things? What is the technology behind doing it? And just as importantly, how do we understand what is actually happening? So analytics. So it kind of sounds like marketing services, but in reality, it's more of a systems thinking approach. Hey, it's all connected. Did you know that content is connected to media, is connected to data, is connected to analytics? They should all work together, and probably most of you on the brand side and agency side have found yourself in silos. Data connects it, so let's unsilo things.
Awesome way of putting it. So when we were chatting last week, you were explaining that Diageo is going through a digital transformation. And you also said, I have a few quotes from him that I'll be reading off, but you also had mentioned that Diageo is trying to hold the tension between performance and responsibility. Can you tell us a little bit about that as it pertains to the digital transformation you're working on as well as that?
Sure. So number one, from a responsibility standpoint, as an alcohol company, we're fairly conservative because of we can only reach people over the age of 21 in the U.S., 19 in certain countries, and 18 in others. So I'm from like a global perspective. And so therefore, number one is only reaching certain people. And everybody else, anybody under those ages, we don't care about, we don't think about, we get nothing attached to that. So that's kind of an interesting, unique piece. But then there's also the responsibility side of things to make sure that, trying to think of the best way to describe it, to make sure that we're not taking advantage of our place in society. And so the way that we think about that is everything from sustainability and carbon impact to progressiveness to also just education on what does responsible drinking look like. And so how does that permeate not just the messages our marketers put out there, but also how we go about things like using technology, media, et cetera. And balancing that with performance, it's a unique thing where if I can't reach anybody under a certain age, and then I'm putting all of these filters through it of, is it progressive? Is it sustainable? Is it safe? Is it suitable, et cetera? All of a sudden, I can't reach enough people to actually drive the business. So how do I balance those things? And we like to maintain that tension. It's a very important one. We never want to swing too far towards responsibility, otherwise we won't perform. And we don't want to swing too much towards performance, otherwise we're not being responsible with our place in society. So that's a balancing act we have to do, and data ultimately helps us inform that, and operations uses it to make better decisions.
And how does that balance change your media mix thinking with regards to the channels that you're running on?
So let me visualize it. Let's say we have 100 people in a room, and let's say only 20% of you are identified as, or raised your hand basically saying, I'm of legal purchase age. And it goes, okay, cool. So my 100 becomes 20 people. And then We have the conversation of, okay, what about from targeting or communicating from a progressive standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint? All of a sudden, our overall inventory of who we can reach is minuscule. So what ultimately we're doing now is we're looking for ways to, in the weeds, in the details, keep on adding back into that inventory and having those conversations of what are more creative ways to not skirt around our responsibilities on those things I talked about, but how do we open up further? I'll give you an example. Can't reach anybody under a certain age. Therefore, video gaming, for some reason, was off of our video games, and gaming overall was off of our docket for inventory. So was music videos. When you think about what's on, let's say, a YouTube or what's on any of the other inventory, I've just crossed off a significant amount of inventory. Rather than saying blanket statements like that, how do we get into the weeds and go, okay, well, when we say this is for under a certain age or it isn't appropriate for us, what does that actually mean? I'll give an example of where we had to do a little bit of a course correct. Smirnoff, which is one of our largest brands, regularly runs, core to its brand is LGBTQ support. And we found that we are actually blocking a lot of those terms because of sexual terms blocked in kind of standard ways. So we actually literally went not just through the terms, but went through inventory by inventory, saying, let's have a more rational conversation about this rather than using a blunt object of saying, we're just crossing out a category. It opens up inventory again. And then on the other side is, when you get into data, is collection of data with consumers. How do we actually give them a reason to share with us? It is their data. We are borrowing it. They're nice enough to let us have it. What is the value exchange? And also that helps us open up inventory also. So if I do well on the consumer experience side and the customer experience side, hopefully that gives me more people to talk to, build a relationship with, instead of just being like, hey, buy my shit.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point with regards to, keywords in general, right? You obviously need to move from brand safety to suitability so that you can open up scale, but also make sure that the context is right specifically for your brand. Programmatic's a big channel. We've talked about that a bit, just a teeny bit. And you had brought up a quote which I thought was interesting, which was, Diageo needs to become experts at marketing to algorithms that market to consumers.
Yes. So it's a fun quote to explain to our executives. Every single day that we're using kind of the largest platforms in the world, ultimately there's something in between us and our consumers. And we need to have that rational conversation of, I'm not going to call it a game, but there's a little bit of a game to be played of, am I doing right by the algorithms so that I can maximize my reach while keeping my my costs down? If I don't play the game, I get penalized. I get shown to less people for more money. If I play the game a little bit, more. But it's a strategic conversation that ultimately we're looking to have. And so based off of that, we're getting input across, let's say, the social platforms, search, et cetera, and just making the assumption of there's a computer. There's I joke around with the executives like, oh, there's robots, they're magical internet elves, whatever. Something is evaluating our stuff before it reaches a consumer. So let's play the game a little bit. Let's not go all the way to the other side where we're just cookie cuttering it. And ultimately look to reach our consumers in a way that makes sense, not only for reaching as many as possible, but also doing right by them in terms of the actual communication.
Also, transparency and efficiency is obviously super important being in programmatic. Kind of what context, or I guess what role does transparency play for you with regards to the inventory that you're buying?
It is
most important.
It is probably the most important thing. So when I first started at Diageo, we played a little game where we said, if I had $1 and I put it through the system, how much of that dollar would make it to the other side? And put it through and basically had a couple of relationships along the way with ad tech, agency, et cetera. And for every dollar, it was coming in at about a little bit under 40 cents on every dollar was actually being used to reach a consumer. And then I have to hope my creative messages are actually strong enough to drive it. Again, I'm in a scale business. If I don't have scale, if I don't have reach, then I'm a little challenged. The reason why I focus on reach isn't because we don't have conversion-based or e-commerce-based. In the US, there's a couple of laws saying I can't really do that much. The rest of the world is a little bit more open of like you can run in more e-commerce and D2C and things like that. So ultimately, just completely lost my thought there. Apologies.
But I think too, but the point of media cost and media quality, right? Like there's a balance there, and how do you buy for that?
Yes. So in terms of media cost and quality, I'm happy to spend an astronomical amount of money if it's of the highest quality and it provides me the transparency. Knowing gives a company like Diageo a lot of comfort. And going back to the put a dollar through, we started having conversations of, okay, what the reason why operations is actually my title is I went literally line item by line item, agency by agency, but just basically being like, okay, where are my hidden costs? Where are decisions made that I'm not even aware of them actually being made? And not how can I only control them, but how can I be a part of the conversation so I have some awareness of it? Now my under 40 cents is actually at 78 cents on every single dollar. That's with agency fees, ad tech fees, et cetera. And that works really well for us. Some of them are those direct negotiations. Some of those are joint business partnerships, and just making sure we know where to run, where we can run safely, and continuously having that conversation. If we see something all of a sudden shifts and it starts getting a little like, oh, there's a new thing over here, don't worry about that over there. That's exactly where I'm looking and asking questions.
Yep, absolutely. It gives you leverage for conversation. And I guess talking about media quality, how do you define media quality?
I mean, for me, the gold standard for media quality is going to be, does it drive return on investment? Now, the challenge I run into is, and this is for most CPGs, I'm at arm's length from the overwhelming majority of that. So I can't say, I would say media quality is going to get into the directional rather than definitive category. So directionally, yeah, this seems to be working. Definitively, it's a little bit harder to get into. But in terms of quality, it's going to be safety is of utmost, suitability, and then ultimately, I would say from a quality standpoint is going to be efficiency. And the reason why is because efficiency is a key contributor to our overall effectiveness or ROI. So we're looking at it across those boards, and I'd say pulling each lever depending on our brand or kind of ultimately what our outcome is meant to be.
Yeah. Speaking of outcomes, obviously ROI is really important, but I think there's a buzzword out there on attention. We didn't touch on it too much last week, but just curious, because I know it's come up a bit also, is, how do you define kind of making sure that you're grasping that attention, especially when you don't have a lot of first-party data and you have to make sure that you're driving outcomes, but attention has to align with it?
Honestly, I struggle a little bit with attention.
Yeah. I hear it a lot in the industry, a lot of struggling.
And I was just talking about it literally 5-10 minutes ago.
Oh.
The reason why I struggle with it is that number one is it's something that's coming up a lot, and a lot of our executives are asking questions about it. Being like, is all of a sudden attention the most important thing in the world? And then you go into, well, there's very, very different definitions of what attention means. One company might say, oh, well, it's whether or not you move your phone because we're using the accelerometer. Another one is like, we're scanning your eyes. And that's a little bit creepy also. And so then it gets into, well, there's a lot of different approaches. Or just, hey, is this billboard on the internet, lack of a better term, a very popular billboard for people to digitally walk past? There's all these different varying definitions. And ultimately, I think it comes down to people love advertising. And if you have incredible advertising, people will pay attention. And so how do you grab attention in the form of the creative, not only the placement? I think it's kind of additive. So it's a factor. I'm just not totally sold on it being the factor. Yeah, the only currency of it.
Yeah, and do you believe that on the attention side that it should be up to the marketer on defining the attention, or do you think it should be up to the platforms and the partners?
I think it's a conversation between both.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because the way a marketer is going to talk about attention is, I'll give an example, is the standard rules are you need your branding in the first 3 seconds because they're probably not getting past 3 seconds, if that. And then it goes, cool, well, a lot of my ad units that I'm buying are 6 seconds, 15 seconds, or longer. And then it's on me to actually maintain the attention, and it's probably not just putting a logo of my product in the first 3 seconds. It needs to be something else. The other thing is a lot of people aren't stopping or clicky or necessarily all in, or they're distracted by other things. So I kind of take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. And platforms are going to argue attention, yes, we're maintaining attention, or some platforms will argue attention doesn't matter. It's about it just appears on the screen and then it has a latent things. Overall, I view it as it's a reach game. If I can keep you for longer, that means the message and the experience overall is doing a good job. If I can't, then I need to just kind of take another look at it and see what I can do. So it's a combination of them. Again, our in marketing departments and digital departments, et cetera, and then also just kind of throughout the world, we talk about things in silos. Consumers are not one-dimensional. It's not, I put it on media and here's my message and you got it and then you bought something. That's not how any of this works. And so you go, cool, all of those other influences, we need to factor those in but not be overwhelmed by every single metric imaginable.
Correct. Speaking of attention, knowing that there's so many, different channels out there now, and especially with the rise of CTV and social, I guess, how are you thinking about those playing a part in your media mix and in your strategy?
I have the point of view and that the world is overwhelmingly going towards biddable. Everything biddable, everything's in an auction. I love that. That's great. And so with that point of view, things moving into CTV, as of right now, they're kind of still separated. Of like CTV is different than TV. I don't necessarily believe it is. And it's just a matter of like, that's a technology conversation rather than a consumer experience. If you flip it onto the other side, you're not going to be like, oh, well, I'm watching Hulu, and so therefore that is CTV rather than TV. You're just watching a show and enjoying it. And so this is a lot of marketers talking to marketers. And so when it comes down to new platforms going forward, first thing I'm going to evaluate of, is this a good experience? Number two is this a good fit for my company? Can I actually advertise there? I know TikTok is mentioned a lot, and we're still working through of how does alcohol advertise on it? Are we allowed to? And is it of legal purchase age? Little things like that. But then if you have the conversation on, I would say, in the new platforms, we're overwhelmed by metrics and all the different ways you can slice and dice things. While on TV, it's kind of like, okay, the TV was on. And yeah, we believe that this is the right household for this, or it's after a certain time. Apparently people under the age of 21 apparently don't stay up past 10 o'clock, so therefore you're good to go.
Yeah.
And so it's like little things like that of like, is it being fair between those two, and how do we normalize the conversation?
And going back to CTV, when you think about it from a biddable perspective and programmatic, transparency is obviously, we need to get to a better place there for buyers and publishers so that there is a more inventory where you can open up scale. How do you feel about that on the transparency side for CTV as you're starting to buy it more biddable?
I would say on the CTV side, there still needs to be a lot more work. I pride myself on being able to poke holes in everything. It's not saying that we're not running in certain places, but it's one of those things of like, hey, we're testing you out. We want to get to a place where we're a little bit more directional than we currently are. But then because the way that I view it is, even if you're outside of CTV and well-established parts of digital, that's not even definitive.
Yeah.
That is just minimized assumptions. And so how can it's basically just continue to have those conversations with each company individually. And every day there's another curveball about, hey, there's a new way to measure it. And it goes, oh, okay, well, what about this situation? And they're like, well, we haven't really factored that in yet. So it's a fun cat and mouse game.
Yeah. So I guess shifting a bit, we did talk a little bit about cookieless, not so relevant for your brand in a way, you would say, right?
Yes. So it's take a regular CPG and go, you probably don't really have too much. You probably have been reliant on third-party cookies because you certainly don't have zero or first-party data. Honestly, we've never really leaned too far into the third-party cookie side of things or the zero or first-party. We've been very reliant on our partners in terms of second-party data. And we've gotten more and more creative with regards to how do we layer on our sales data at a very granular or localized level to say, hey, not demographically, but overall we're seeing the following behaviors or occasions in these areas, and that tends to be within the following things that are beneficial to our business. And so while I would say, like when we say we're going through a digital transformation, most companies are probably having the conversation of, we need to collect more data and know our consumers better. There's a lot of ways to do that, and most of the way that we're leaning into it is, let's ask them and give them a reason to a value exchange to answer. Let's continue to work with partners that have their own data that they've acquired compliantly, et cetera, and be transparent about, hey, this is why we're talking to you. And really kind of staying away from what is a little bit more of a black box of third-party data, just because, again, in my category, I don't have the liberty of not really knowing who I'm advertising to, and a lot of those are the mingling of data that I probably can't really touch.
Yeah. But the cookie list has obviously given a resurgence to contextual. How do you think of contextual targeting? And obviously, it's obviously a large part of your media mix when you're thinking about reaching those that you need to reach within age gates and such.
Yeah. So for contextual, it's increasingly important to our business. And the reason why is, I would say there's the positives and negatives. On the negative side, we use contextual targeting for the purposes of avoiding places where we really shouldn't be. For instance, kids content is just one example. There's a couple of other ones. I don't really want to talk about those ones, but that one happens. On the positive side of things is our brands are about celebration. We focus on the parts of, hey, if you're out consuming one of our products, it's probably because you're enjoying yourself and you have a good time. Here's the type of occasions of celebration, ultimately. And so when you think about it that way, it goes, okay, well, from a contextual standpoint, where are the points of celebration or occasions of celebration happening? And contextual allows us to make sure that when we're talking about celebrating something, it's not something negative surrounding it, essentially.
Correct. Meaningful moments. Great. So I think, just to kind of tie it all in a bow a bit, innovation is obviously a big topic today since that is the name of the summit. How are you thinking about innovation 6 months, 12 months for your brand? And, what do you really hope that the industry is kind of leapfrogging ahead on?
I would say innovation in the space that I'm focused on now is I'd say getting creative with breaking down the silos between the various departments. I'm on a global team. There's silos between global and local. There's also silos between, let's say, the IT side of things and the marketing technology side of things. How do we break those down? But ultimately, I'd say my main focus is how are we commingling data and getting more creative in the data space. Like if there is a role, a title of chief creative data officer, there's an opportunity here rather than just readily what's available, but asking smarter and better questions. So sales data at a location based with a impressions or media spend, layering on with, let's say, the sustainability of the media itself. Does that help me? Does that hurt me in terms of how to do those things? That's where my innovation is coming from, is in the weeds, and it's kind of fun. That one, and privacy, just because it's a fun topic.
Big topic.
Yeah, it's a big topic, increasingly important.
Yes,
so.
I would agree. Last quote from Josh. All the data and tech in the world won't help us unless we have smart people to do something with it. Wanted to end on that for you, since I think it's very relevant at that how important all of us are in this room and the talent that we have to be hiring and all of that good stuff. So thought you could comment on it.
Yeah, so where that one came out is that a lot of people in the industry are like, I'm collecting hundreds of billions of data points on consumers. And my response to our executives when they're like, we're behind, was we're not in the data collection business. We're not in the data storage business. We're in the make better business decisions business. And what data is actually going to help us do this? This gets into privacy. This gets into the creativity side of things. And even going as far as that is, just because you have data, just because you have technology, doesn't mean you're making smarter decisions. So we're building up an analytics team that is meant to go across multiple data sources. Rather than saying, I have a social listening expert, we're looking for somebody that can go, here's a social listening question or a social media question, and let's see what happens when I commingle that with sales data, when I commingle that with supply chain data. And for me, that gets into innovation of how my ultimate dream of this, if I can be dramatic, is how am I connecting consumer, customer, and supply chain for the purposes of saying, hey, a consumer is looking for this. How do I have data that is going to influence a customer of ours to then have that in stock? And how can I make sure that whatever that recommendation is happening there is actually being fed by our supply chain? And so I'm looking at it across the board and probably overstepping my bounds outside of marketing.
That's okay. We have a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, there we go. Okay.
Hey, thanks for sharing. My name's Lee Nadler. Question for how you're dealing with, you can handle it however you want, data or insights or otherwise, but with D2C platforms and people ordering online and delivery, and then also your retailers and then premise and stuff, or do you mostly focus on just kind of a key channel of distribution, or do you kind of now look at how people are ordering and how to manage all those pipelines?
So I'm in a global role. So from a U.S. standpoint, I have a very different answer than I have for the rest of the world. So from a U.S. standpoint, it is definitely through our distributors because legally we can't do D2C. So so that's one. So therefore, in terms of data and insights, it's really still understanding, I would say, looking to understand the consumer and how they go about things, and then working within the bounds of compliance and just making sure that it's not a shitty experience when we're doing those things. But I look at consumers holistically rather than only in the alc bev category, just so that just because like I think about like I can't sell on Amazon as an example, and so but therefore but it doesn't hurt me to know, hey, maybe they're shopping on Amazon, and this is kind of how they go about it. How do I mimic that experience, or at least not make it a painful experience for them to easily get what they want when they want it? Because right time, right place, right person, all of that still applies regardless of what I'm allowed to do or not do.
Hi, Josh. I'm Juicy. I work at Google. Given your data-driven decision focus, what's the challenge from a cultural change or change management within the company?
I would say probably our biggest challenge is going to be convincing people to ask better questions and then seek answers in platforms that we have already. And the reason why I say that is I'll hear from executives sometimes like, oh, we're data poor, or and my response is, we're overwhelmed by data. And we just need to ask smarter questions and then seek the answers in the stuff that is readily available, or seek answers outside of that. And so I would say the culture change that ultimately needs to happen for us is, how do we ask more questions? How do we make sure that they don't just ask the question into the ether or to an agency or whoever? It's they go, okay, and now I have a place to go and seek answers for that. And that can be whether it's a sales question, a marketing question, a consumer question, et cetera. That's probably the biggest change, because a lot of the work that Diageo's have been going on has been more gut-based for a while. My goal is to make it more of an informed gut. And ultimately, data for me means that it's not telling you what to do, it's saying, here's your options. Here's how you can make a better decision. And that's why we emphasize on it. So our overall vision is, how do we make every experience with Diageo, that's internal or external, smarter or better with data?
Hi, how are you? I'm Liz Blacker with Univision. Nice to meet you. Great panel. So in this era of privacy and cookies or not, how are you targeting or not, or connecting with different audiences in multicultural space, both here and around the world?
Yeah, I mean, from a speaking about what we were talking about a little bit earlier, a lot of our media mix is ultimately evolving towards people that already have that relationship, and leveraging that to not only better understand our consumer, but reach them through that, rather than only looking to collect our own or using third party, is kind of how to do that. But focusing on the word relationship, there's a very key initiative within Diageo around progressive investment. And it's not just saying like, oh, can I target people that are, different than, different's the wrong word. I would say just taking a more progressive approach to who we're reaching and why, but we're also going a little bit further of saying like, are the companies behind whatever we are doing, are they multicultural? Are they LGBTQ? Are they walking the walk rather than just talking the talk? Capturing money is very easy, but then actually delivering on it, we're holding more and more of our partners accountable on those pieces and continuing to invest in those areas, because right now we need to adjust that investment mix to be a little bit more diverse.
Is that it? Okay. Thank you, Josh. That was awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Hopefully see you all later.